السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Continue inshallah ta'ala with the fiqh, and we are still in the chapter of al-ijara. The chapter of al-ijara, and I think we stopped where مسائل في الإجارة. مسائل, some of the issues, مسائل with matters of al-ijara. And just a quick review. We talked about the definition of al-ijara, which is a عقد على منفعة. So it's a contract on a منفعة, on a benefit. It has to be permissible, it has to be known, and it's permissible, and it's عقد لازم من الطرفين. And the meaning of عقد لازم, that it's a binding contract. What does it mean it's a binding contract? That means, usually as a rule, if you have rights to be fulfilled, that means the contract is binding. So you have here both the renter and the one that is renting. They both have rights. So if someone make a contract to rent something, the person, the owner, he has the right because money needs to be given to him, and the one that is renting has a right upon the other side in which he has to give him the object or whatever he's renting. So since both have rights upon the other one, so that's why the contract is binding from both sides. No one has the right to break the contract on his own unless it's stated in the contract, or unless it's valid. Something breaks the contract, as it should be known also with matters of buying and selling. And then, sorry, the al-ijara. Al-ijara is the rent. So we talked about the conditions, and then without going back again, if you have any questions, you can talk about it, inshallah. No, actually, we stopped of where? وَمَا يُشْتَرَطُ في المؤجر. What's in English? Title in English? No. Condition of what it's being leased or hired. As we said, al-mu'ajjar or al-ijara is general for anything that is being rented, whether it's an object or a human being. You're renting a human being, yes, that's what they call you hiring someone. In Arabic, linguistically, what does it mean to hire someone? That means this person is working for you. The benefit that he's going to do for you, this is the rent. This is what it means by ijara. Which is, you can say hiring, it doesn't matter, but this is the meaning of it. So ما يشترط في المؤجر, the conditions that are necessary to be fulfilled in whatever object that you're renting, or if you're hiring someone. And you can add to the conditions according to both agreeing to something. So first, يشترط في العين المؤجرة. العين, if it's a specific or a physical object. If you're renting a car, renting an apartment, something like this. معرفتها برؤية أو صفة. معرفتها, to know it, whether it's by seeing it or by being described to you. So you can rent something even though you didn't see it, but it's described. People can send pictures, they can write descriptions exactly what you're renting with all the details that is needed. This is a condition. That means if you made the rental agreement and then you go there, you didn't see it, but it was described to you, and something that is not according to the description, you have the right to break the contract. Or if you accept it, you accept it. But you have the right to break the contract. Is not binding in this way because the condition is not being met. So knowing it, whether it's with seeing it or being described to you. The second thing, أن يعقد على نفعها دون أجزائها. That a person would make the contract on the naf'a, on the benefit, not on the physical being of the object. What does that mean? Of course, you're renting the object, but you're renting to benefit from it. So, for example, if you're renting a car, you're renting to benefit from the car by driving it, by taking it places, things like this. But you're not renting it so that you can change the door to something else. You can change the door because you don't like the door. You can put accessories in there that you like it better. It's not of your right to do that because you're only renting it to benefit from it. You can put things in it, your bags, you can hang something inside. It's up to you, but it's not something that you have the right to the parts of it or to the thing itself. The same thing renting an apartment. You're renting to benefit from it, whatever the benefit that you agreed upon, to live in, things like this. You don't have the right to change the decor, for example, build a wall, remove a wall, things like this, unless the one that is renting will permit. So that's what it means, أن يعقد على نفعها. The aqd is on the naf'. The naf' is the benefits, not the being or the physical being of it. أن يقدر على تسليمها. Number 3, that a person has the ability to التسليم is to give it to the one that is renting. So if someone rents an apartment, but he's not able to hand it to the one that rented because it's rented to someone else, well, that's not even a thing to be mentioned. That means he has to have the ability to give it to the person. So he has to have it to give it to him. يقدر على تسليمها. And that applies to the one that acts on someone's behalf. Someone would say to someone else, rent the car for me. So that person that is not the owner of the car, does he have the right to give a third person the car? Can he rent it to him? Does he have the authority to sign on behalf of the owner? Or, so he has to be able to give it to the one that rented. وأن تشتمل على المنفعة, that it has to have the manfa'a. It has to have the benefit that they rented it for. So if someone rented a car again, right? So the car has to be driven. So if he rented a car that doesn't move, what's the purpose, right? So or he rented a truck to move furniture. But then when he went to the place where it rents the truck, he says, "I'm sorry, the whole box is full of things. Can you please don't open it? Why am I renting it for?" Does the contract is binding? Of course not, because he rented it to benefit, to move something, so it has to be empty. So أن تشتمل على المنفعة, that it has the منفعة or the benefit. And وأن تكون مملوكة للمؤجر أو مأذونا له فيه. Has to be owned by the مؤجر. So we have a مؤجر. مؤجر is the one that rents. The owner, he's called مؤجر. The contract is called إجارة. The مؤجر with the kasra is the owner, he's renting. المستأجر is the one that is renting. And al-ayn is the object, al-mu'ajjara, which is the one that is the subject of being rented. So the place or the thing has to be owned, or أو مأذونا له فيها, or someone else has the permission, whether it's written or whatever. He has to have the permission to rent it on behalf of the owner. So these are conditions. How many? 5 conditions. Knowing it with the details. The contract is on the benefit, not the physical being. And also that applies for the hiring. If you're hiring someone to do a work for you, you didn't hire the person to be your slave. You don't own him. You just own the benefit, the contract that is between you, which is in the job description. And that you're able to give what you rent, and it has to be there when it comes to the benefit. The benefit is there, and the last thing is that it has to be owned by the one that is renting. Then مسائل في الإجارة. Some of the مسائل here in the إجارة, and there are many rules, of course, and many things, but we're taking just the basics so that we understand the principles of it, inshallah. He says the first one, تصح إجارة الوقف فإن مات المؤجر وانتقل إلى من بعده لم تنفسخ وللثاني حصته من الأجرة. Here refers to الوقف. What is the waqf? Is the endowment. Am I saying it right? The endowment. So if something that is an endowment, someone, al-waqf, and the next chapter actually is al-waqf. Al-waqf is basically when someone would own something and he would give it for a waqf. Waqf is when something is limited or standing. That means it's limited for whatever he makes the endowment for. So he purchased a building and he says this building is waqf. That means I give it for the sake of Allah, and this building has apartments and it's rented, and the money comes out of the rent. He would specify that all the money that comes from that building is to be given to the poor in the city, or to the poor in another place, or to purchase books of da'wah, or whatever he specified. Then it should be only given to what this endowment is for. Or for the masjid. Someone, instead of giving money to the masjid, he gives the masjid a place, and he can specify. He can say this place, the money, whatever money comes from that store or from that place, this is all to go to the masjid. So then, can you rent a waqf? You have a waqf. You have a place that is waqf without a specific thing for the waqf. It can be rented because it's waqf, endowment. So you can rent it. And فإن مات المؤجر, and if the person that is renting dies, it goes to the one after him. It doesn't have to be broken in this case. And whenever the person gets it, then he pays the share of the rent. Right? So then this is when it comes to the waqf, because the waqf has someone responsible for it. And all that depends on the contract itself and the details of the contract. So there's the subject of al-waqf and the ijara of the waqf, which is always the waqf one is mentioned with it, al-ijara, or renting the waqf. That's why the next point, كل ما حرم بيعه حرمت إجارته إلا. Take it as a rule. Anything that is haram to sell, it's haram to rent, except al-waqf, endowment, al-hurr, a free man, a free person, not a slave, wa al-walad. Al-walad literally says the mother of the boy. What does that mean? The first part of the condition or the principle here, everything that is haram to sell is haram to rent. So if it's haram to sell, what? Tell me an example that it's haram to sell. Alcohol, but alcohol is to drink. How can you rent an alcohol? Of course, it's obvious, but we need something that can be rented, that it's haram. Huh? Haram to buy what is haram to sell? It's haram to rent. So what is something that is haram for you to sell? Musical instrument. It's haram to sell a musical instrument. So therefore, it's haram to rent a musical instrument. Anything that is haram to sell, a person might rent even something for a pig, for example, to put him in a picture or whatever there is. So anything that is haram to sell, it's haram to rent. The same thing if it's halal in itself, but you know that people use it for haram. So a person haram to sell a car for someone that basically would use it to transport alcohol. So the same thing, if you know, of course. So if an alcohol company wants to rent a truck you have, then it's haram to give it as a rent because it's going to be used in haram knowingly for sure. So this is in general. Anything that is haram to sell, it's haram to rent. And anything that is haram to sell anyway. So anything that Allah forbade, إذا حرم الله شيئا حرم بيعه. That's hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which makes, of course, perfect sense. If Allah forbade something, then He forbids selling it. So we don't need to have someone to say, what's the dalil, what's the evidence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade selling alcohol, for example. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade it, that means it's haram to sell it. Plus, even alcohol has a specific hadith of cursing the one that sells it in specific terms. Except, so anything that is haram to sell is haram to rent, except al-waqf, endowment, it's haram to sell the waqf. If someone gave something as waqf, it's haram to say, I take it back, I'm sorry, too late. You gave it away, you cannot take it back. And it's haram to be sold to someone else. It's waqf. Unless there is in some specific exceptions here, if it's not going to be sold, it's going to be ruined or something like this. So it's haram to sell the waqf. Al-hurr, someone is free, someone is not a slave. Can you sell a free man? Of course not. So this is an obvious one. So even though you can hire a person to work for you. So here al-ijara, what is the meaning of ijara of a person? That means you hired someone to work for you. So because the rule is if something is haram to sell, it's haram to rent. So since a human being, it's haram to sell a human being, but it's halal to hire a human being. And when you hire him, that means this is the contract of ijara. So when you hire someone, what's the name of the contract of hiring someone to work for you? It's called aqdu ijara. It's ijara contract. And all the conditions of al-ijara applies. The third one is walad. Walad, when there was slavery, if the woman or the slave woman, she becomes pregnant by her owner and she gives birth. So now she's al-walad. She's the mother of the boy or the girl that is from her owner, the slave owner, right? The ruling here that if the owner dies, she's free automatically, and she is now to be given less work. She's to be treated in a different way because now she's the mother of his son. So she's not in the level of being enslaved and things like this. So this is walad. That means it's a step for her to be freed. So in this case also it's haram to sell. It's haram for him to sell her in slavery or whatever, because she gave birth to his son. So كل ما حرم بيع حرمت إجارته, except these three things. The next point, تنفسخ الإجارة بتلف العين المؤجرة وانقطاع نفعها. الإجارة, the contract is تنفسخ, that means it's broken, it's not there anymore. بتلف العين المؤجرة, by the التلف is when the عين, العين meaning the specific object that is being rented, if it's ruined, that means the contract is there anymore. It's not there anymore. So if someone rented an apartment for a year and then the building collapsed, there's no contract anymore because he's renting the benefit that he gets. So if it's get ruined, that means the contract is broken. It's not there anymore. وانقطاع نفعها, or the benefit is terminated. There's no benefit anymore. So again, rented a car and then the car just died. There's no benefit that comes from it. So there's no ijara. The ijara is not there. So the contract will be invalid. Clear? Another مسألة here. He says يجوز أخذ الأجرة على التعليم وبناء المساجد ونحوها أما الحج فيجوز مع الحاجة أخذ الأجرة. This is a subject that requires a little bit of attention here to differentiate, to be very specific in the types of contracts. So literally this is what it says. Can you read the English? يجوز.
Receive wages for teaching, building mosques, and so forth.
As for Hajj?
Receive wages for Hajj on another's behalf is allowed only in the case.
Okay. The word wages is loose, right? So what it says is you can take ujra. Ujra from ijara, right? That means you can be hired to teach. You can be hired to teach. Whether the hiring is based on you're going to teach that book. So the entire book, when you finish it, this is the contract is based on the action or based on time. You're a teacher, your time is from 8 to 3, right? So you're hired. So the contract is ijar. This is a form of rent. So this is hiring. So it's permissible to take the ujra as a result of that, to take salary for being in a contract of being hired as ijara. I'm not sure how to articulate that in the most perfect or the most precise wordings in English because the words are used all over the place, right? So we're talking about the contract of ijara because we'll talk about something else right after this one. And if, inshallah, pay attention so that you can even reword it better than me so that we understand it well, inshallah, because there's a very slight difference between two things here. So it's permissible to be in a contract of ijara, to be hired to teach, because the benefit is extended to others. وبناء المساجد, you can be hired as a contractor to build a masjid. Building a masjid is a good deed, right? But it's permissible to hire someone. To hire someone, that means there's a contract between you and the builder, and you can bargain. All these things you need to consider because when we talk about something else, you would find there's differences between this and something else. So when you're in a contract of ijara, hiring someone, you can bargain. A person can say, no, building the masjid, I would get 100,000 for it. And you can have bids. No, can you just be a lower a little bit? Brother, this is for the sake of Allah. If he doesn't want to, that's fine. It's permissible contract. Even though it's a masjid, Yes, it's out of his goodness. He should do it even free and all of this, but it's permissible to have a contract of ijar and the like of that. Anything that is being done. And these things are mentioned like this in this context as if it's an act of obedience to Allah, but it's not ibadat. As we'll see, the next subject is al-ibadah. Amma al-hajj, as for hajj, can you give someone, can you hire someone to make hajj on someone else's behalf? Can someone else make hajj on someone's behalf? Yes, hajj al-badal. If he does it for free, mashallah. If he does it and then you give him something, that's fine. But can you hire someone? Hiring means how much you going to pay? 10. No, I won't do it unless it's 12. This is ujra. This is a contract of hiring. He says here, فَيَجُوز, it's permissible مع الحاجة, if it's needed. This is the only way to do it. There's no other ways. And this has differences of opinion. Right? Plus, why would you want to do this if you want to do Hajj al-Badal with someone like that? Someone would do it and doesn't really care how much he gets, because all of the expenses, we're not talking about the expenses of Hajj. The expenses is to be paid from the one that is making Hajj on his behalf. So if someone died and he did not make Hajj from his inheritance, or if the heirs will give it from their own money, that's fine. But someone else to do Hajj on his behalf, he'll take that money because it requires lots of money to make Hajj. This is not ujra here. We're talking about the extra. They'll pay for the package and food and drink and lodging and all of this, but he says after all of that is taken care of, I want 5,000 for me, my pocket. This is what is meant by to hire someone to make Hajj for someone else. If someone says this, it's only permissible if it's needed. But of course, it's better to avoid this. But if you give him a gift or something, that's not wages. This is not ijar. This is a gift. This is something else. Okay? Why this is mentioned? Because right the next one, he says, إذا أخذ الإمام أو المؤذن أو المعلم للقرآن من بيت المال أو أعطي بلا شرط جاز له ذلك. This is the mas'ala of giving the imam a salary, or the mu'adhin, who makes adhan, or the one that teaches the Quran from Bayt al-Mal. If he takes from Bayt al-Mal, what's Bayt al-Mal? The money of the Muslimin, as a Muslim government, they give. And what comes in that place, as the ulama, they say, for example, in the West, you have the masajid. There's no awqaf where it gives these types of things. So the masajid would act on the same way as Baytul Mal. Or either it's from Baytul, if it's given from Baytul Mal, or if he's given from whatever source without a condition, it's permissible. Without a condition. Meaning, without him saying, no, I won't do it except by this, without a condition. But we're talking here about what? About ijara. About being hired. And this is where it gets tricky in how to explain it. And this has differences of opinions. Is it permissible to hire an imam to make salah? The imam is making salah. And the imam is getting a salary to make salah? Some said, no, it's not permissible. It's ibadah. A person making ibadah and is taking ajr, ijara. A contract of ijara, that means how much is the salah, is how much money for one salah. I prayed 4 salah today. So, this, and if he missed one, you take off. This is how aqd al-ijara is. Some said it's permissible, and some said it's not permissible. We're not going to get into the details of this. But what is not, what is agreed upon, and there's no differences of opinions, if something else is given, which is not a contract of ijar. It's the word, and write this word down, because it's in the books of fiqh, it's called al-razq. Al-rizq, with a kasra, with a fatha, that's what it's called. Al-razq. Razq al-jund, razq al-imam. The same word as rizq. But here it's a specific term that refers to the army, for example, in the past, the time of the khulafa and things like this, the people in the army, they would take razq. At the time, Sahaba, the Tabi'een, the Salaf, it was well known, even at the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, that the imams and the mu'adhins and the ulama, they would get a razq. So this is agreed upon, because we're not going to be better than the early generations of Islam. And a razq, there's difference between a razq, or something is given, different than being hired with aqd of al-ijara. But a razq is permissible, no differences of opinion, so that the subject, when someone is asked, is it permissible for the imam to be hired? But the word is used this, we hired an imam, right? Doesn't the masajid say that? We hired an imam. It's because the words are not used from the perspective of fiqh in the right way. But it's permissible to hire an imam. It's permissible to hire a mu'adhin according to some. But according to others, it's not permissible. But what's no differences of opinion whatsoever, that you can give the imam razq, you can give the mu'adhin razq, you can give whoever teacher of the Quran razq. So the end result is going to be the same, but there is some differences. And since this is an issue that we all have some form or the other, exposure to it, so let's mention some of the differences that the ulama mentioned between al-ijara and al-razq in this case. The word al-razq is specific to the ibadat, matters of ibadah. So where it's not permissible, according to some, to be hired to do. Right? So Imam Ahmad, for example, rahimahullah, when someone asked him, someone said, I won't pray Taraweeh for you unless you give me, then he gave him a quote, unless you pay me that much money. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he said, Man yusalli khalfa hada? Who would want to pray behind that person? As-Salah is ibadah. So you cannot do that. But if the people, again, if something is given for matters of ibadah like this is permissible, but it's called al-razq. First of all, it's different than al-ijara because it's an ibadah. It is not permissible, which is a very clear differences between both. When it comes to the razq, it's not permissible that it's done for the money, but the money is given, but it's not done for it. You understand that what that means? Like, for example, a person would take the money to go make hajj, but he doesn't make hajj for the money, right? He takes money to lead the people, but he doesn't lead the people for the money, right? And this is something in the heart, of course. So this is one of the differences here, that it's done sincerely for the sake of Allah. And of course, the purpose of that is that somebody needs to have the time to do this. And with other things, as for example, the teaching and things of that nature. And as we said, this is something that is agreed upon because Imma of as-Salaf, they used to be upon this, to give them the time to study, to teach, and the benefit is extended to others. To give things to students of knowledge so that they have all the time to study. So whether they call it maybe stipends, things like this, right? So it's, your money is given for the benefit that is going to come from these individuals. When you look at the ijara, it's not, for those who said it's not permissible in ibadat, it's in transactions, right? So things that is not ibadat. Also, the ijara, it can be meant for it by itself, specifically. You can, for example, a person is taking money for that job, different than the ibadat. You don't make the ibadah for the money, but I'll build the house for you for money, right? So the ijara, a person is making it for money, but for the ibadah is not made for the money. For a razq, it's not permissible to bargain. It's not permissible to set a price. And this is one of the things that is happening even clearly in the West. Looking for imam, and says, I remember someone, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us, but he says, my khutbah is worth that much. People would say these types of things. Is it permissible to make an ijara or a contract to hire imam? According to some, yes. So for those who say it's permissible, there's no harm. But for those who say it's not permissible, then it's not permissible, but the razq is agreed upon. You agree? So if it's razq, you don't set a condition. You don't bargain. Of course, the Baytul Mal Muslimin, away from having to deal with individuals, they would take care of the needs of those who are leading the people, teaching the people. And as we said, the Imma like Sufyan al-Thawri and others, this is how their life, according to the norm of the people, what is sufficient for them to live a life like everyone else. Why? Because of the time that they are needed to fulfill whatever they're entrusted to do. But again, it's is not something to be bargained into things of that nature. Of course, one of the conditions or one of the differences when it comes to al-razq, a person should fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seek rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he's doing what he thinks is best for his religion, not that he's doing it for money. And alhamdulillah, also we can know this is the best of what he thinks or what he knows that is best for one's religion or for the religion of others or for the purpose of the deen, whatever there is. Which is not necessarily the case when it comes to matters of al-ijab. One of the also very specific thing that the ulama they mention, and I'm sorry for taking this, but this is important. If someone has a contract of someone is hired and he worked for a couple of weeks and the salary comes at the end of the month and that person died, his family or the inheritors, they're entitled to the rent, to the salary for at least the 2 weeks that he worked. But someone is given razq, they're not entitled for anything. There's no rights because the money that was given for him to be have the ability to have the time to do this. It's not ujra. It's not a salary. If it's razq, if it's to be considered as razq. So if he dies before the month ends, then there's no rights for the inheritors anyway. As far as the salary, because it's again, it's not necessarily the word salary is not the right word to be used.
Different from salary?
The razq is different than ijara. So the salary is, does the salary always have to be associated with hiring? I looked, but not in too much details. But what is the correspondence of this? Like, for example, if someone is doing, I guess they call it salary and hiring and things like this. But this is one of the forms of money that comes originally from Baytul Mal. And this is, again, it's not something invented. This is something that was at the time of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. So no one is to come later and say, no, we should not apply this. We're not better than the early generations of Islam. This is how things were. Yes, like the students.
They're not hired, but they give it spot.
No, like the students when they go to school, as long as it's not like loans or anything like this. Say, for example, the government will give them stipends because they're going to school. And if they keep their grades or whatever, so it's not salary, it's to give them the time to study. Now, Hassan, the same thing, and this is one of the things or the subject of a razq, especially here in the West, it's something that should be focused upon. For example, students of knowledge, to give them all the time to study. If someone is, he fits, he's smart, he has the dedication, he's religious, he's righteous, he fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he is working as a contractor, or he drives a taxi, or he's a doctor even, right? We have tons of them. We have many of them. But that person, if he would take his time out and study the deen for a few years to benefit the ummah, to benefit others, and he is to be given sufficiency, not to make him in need, but to give him whatever is needed to get him married even, and to get him to live the norm of the people. And every norm of the people is different. So, right, so it's not a price that it's given. It's according to the environment that he's in, and to take care of his needs and things like this because of the benefit that is waiting, or hoping that he would benefit the ummah from. This is something that is needed, and it's been done from the times of the early generations of Islam. The same thing with, again, to run the masajid and things of that nature, but it's to be given as razq. No salaries, negotiations, no nothing of this, just whatever is sufficient for them to have living and things like this. And it might be a form of humiliation, but actually this is a sacrifice for those who would leave. How many people they would leave their job. This is, again, if it's needed with all these conditions, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best what's in the hearts with the sincerity and things like this. But again, to go back, if someone would take as it's permissible for ijara, the matter has differences of opinion. But it's, if you ask, it's not necessarily true that it's permissible. But for those who say it's true, it's permissible, definitely it's better to avoid this, to be away from the differences of opinions. And again, as we said, the statement of Imam Ahmad, because if you go to as the subject of al-ijara, you know, if, say for example, Imam of a masjid or the mu'adhin, the salary is late, I'm not going to lead. You know, he says, find someone else, and he stays home, for example. It's ibadah. This is, maybe they should test someone like this. So this is, of course, it shows that this is not deen, this is something else. And this is what Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah, he said. It's clear, inshallah. طيب, let's go to the hadith. Yesterday, the last time we took what number? Was it in the... So this is in Bulugh al-Maram. So we go to the 40 hadiths, inshallah. From the 40 hadith al-Nawawiyah. The last hadith we took was that one. We took the last one was 126. So now 127. And it's related to the subject here. 127. It's a long hadith, but it's easy, inshallah. Like all the hadiths. 127. You guys ready? 127. حديث 127. Everybody's there? طيب. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله تعالى طيب لا يقبل إلا طيبا لا يقبل إلا طيبا وإن الله تعالى أمر المؤمنين بما أمر به المرسلين فقال يا أيها الرسل كلوا من الطيبات واعملوا صالحا وقال تعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم ثم ذكر الرجل يطيل السفر أشعث أغبر يمد يديه إلى السماء يا رب يا رب ومطعمه حرام ومشربه حرام وملبسه حرام وغذي بالحرام فأنى يستجاب لذلك رواه مسلم وسمى the nations فأنى يستجاب له. So here the hadith, the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, he said إن الله تعالى Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most high, طيب لا يقبل إلا طيب. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala طيب, pure, he does not accept except what is pure. وإن الله تعالى أمر المؤمنين بما أمر به المرسلين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the believers the same way that he commanded the messengers. So he said, يا أيها الرسل, O messengers, this is in Surah Al-Mu'minun, verse number 51. يا أيها الرسل كلوا من الطيبات واعملوا صالحا. O messengers of Allah, eat from what is pure and do righteous good deeds. This is the command to the messengers. And then وقال تعالى, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا, O you who believe, كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم. Eat from the pure of what we provided for you. So that means he commanded the messengers and he commanded the believers the same thing. So this is the meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the believers with the same thing that he commanded the messengers, and that is to eat what is pure. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tayyib, that means he is pure, that means he has no deficiency whatsoever. This is the meaning of tayyib. لا يقبل إلا طيبا, he does not accept anything unless it's pure. And the context of the hadith means that when it comes to matters of wealth, but of course in general, that means the money that a person gives for the sake of Allah has to be pure. It's not something that is haram money. And also the action has to be purely for the sake of Allah. Then the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, ثم ذكر, he mentioned, ذكر, that means he mentioned, الرجل, he mentioned the man, any man, يطيل السفر, يطيل السفر, safar is traveling, يطيل, that means the traveling is long, طول is the length of something, so يطيل السفر, that means his traveling is long. أشعث أغبر, أشعث is description of his hair, uncombed hair, أشعث. أغبر from الغبرة, which is the dust. So his hair is uncombed and he's dusty, which is basically, it shows that his traveling, it's been for a long time. He is doing all kinds of effort. And some of the ulama, they said, in explanation of the hadith, that means the traveling was even for ibadah, someone going for hajj. And this is how his state is, doing things for the sake of Allah, such a ibadah, that caused him to be uncombed and dusty and things like this. يَمُدُّ يَدَيْهِ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ, he extend his hand to the skies, making dua. Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabb. He say, Ya Rabb, Ya Rabb, making dua. But then, وَمَطْعَمُهُ haram. مَطْعَمُهُ, what he eats is haram. And مَطْعَمُهُ haram, that means the physical thing that he eats is haram, or مَطْعَمُهُ haram, that what he earns is haram, and he buys halal, zabiha, all of this stuff, but it's the money that he earned is haram. So مطعمه haram. ومشربه haram. He drinks from haram because his earning is haram. وملبسه haram, and his clothing, his garments is haram because of, again, the haram earnings. وغذي بالحرام. His nutrition, الغذاء is nutrition. The nutrients that he gets also from haram. فأنا يستجاب لذلك. أنا is بالبعيد. Far is for his acceptance, for his dua. That means his dua is not accepted. How can the dua be accepted from someone like this? Also, one of the benefits of the hadith, of course, the obvious benefit here, as you see the hadith, the importance of purifying one's source of income, where the person's money coming from. That has an effect on one's dua. It's a matter of halal and haram. What is nutrition as a result of haram, the hellfire will take care of it. That means this is subjecting oneself to the punishment in the hellfire. So the halal and haram in transaction and buying and selling and earnings and working and hiring and all of this affects one's deen directly and affects the ibadat also. It's not like a separate sin that a person committing sin in his workplace, but then he comes to the masjid, dua is, and life and ibadah is completely different, and family, it's all together. So this is haram and it affects the ibadah. And the ulama mentioned one of the benefits here, one or some of the means for the dua to be accepted. Someone that is a traveler, his dua is accepted. Someone that doesn't have the means that makes him forgetful. He doesn't have to be uncombed and dusty, but it shows that when a person is less attached to matters of worldly things, he's more humble, so his dua can be more accepted. And being away from his family, things like this, the heart is more attached to Allah. So these are all means for the dua to be accepted, and to raise your hand and making dua, which is one of the etiquettes of dua, to raise your hand and making dua, and to say, Ya Rabb, Ya Rabb, seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his names and attributes. But then all of these things, as mentioned, things that prevents the person from the dua to be accepted. So to make the dua and to take the means to make the dua, all of that is important, but at the same time to eliminate from oneself the things that would prevent the person from having the dua accepted. And also great benefits. So it shows conditions of the dua, etiquettes of the dua, what prevents the dua to be accepted, or some of it, attributing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the most perfect names and attributes, and denying any deficiency to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It shows that some deeds are accepted, some deeds are not accepted. So it's not about doing the deeds, but to make sure that the person will take the means for the deeds to be accepted. This is the most important determination that a person should have in this life, not just treating the matters of deen as anything and that's it, thinking that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful and that's it. But also to exalt Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, also the shadidul iqab, severe in punishment. And one of the benefits that the ulama they mentioned is the halal is not something to be belittled. Someone to earn halal, especially in the time that we live in, this is a great ni'mah from Allah. Person should be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and should have the fear of Allah and to make sure that this is more important than anything else. Person should have it to himself, his covenant between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he died, he's not going to earn from haram. If a person has this attitude, the halal will come. But if he has conditions, and Allah knows what's in the heart. If in his heart, deep in his heart, if things get tighter and difficult, I might do this, I might do that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows in the heart. This type of person can be tested. Things can become more difficult for him, so that now here you go. What you're going to do with matters of earnings. So to make sure that when at times of ease, the person's he examine himself. No way he's going to indulge in the halal. And one of the things of the haram. And one of the things when it comes to earning money, and forgive me for taking long, as mentioned before, two things. If you are extreme in, it's okay. Extremism is bad, except in two things: earnings and the iffa of the woman. If she's extreme in her iffa and her shyness, being away from the eyes of others and things like this, mashallah, this is great. Of course, as long as the person is not having some form of a complexity, that's a different situation. And the same thing, it doesn't have to be, is it halal, is it haram? She wants to do extra iffa to be, it's fine, mashallah, encourage it to be like this. The same thing with earning. Don't say, is it haram? Doesn't have to be haram for you to avoid it. It can be doubtful, and we have to leave what is doubtful out of the fear of falling into the haram. So to have the wara' and to abstain from what is haram, so to see the importance of the halal and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored the believers. He gave them the same command as He gave the messengers of Allah. So they are honored as a result of this. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify our sources of income and to make us always live in matters of halal.